So welcome everybody to the steering committee meeting for Wednesday, December 5th. I'm sure we are all incredibly busy in preparation for KubeCon. So I tried to look through the action items in our agenda, which I will post into the chat here. And I think where we had left off the last time we met, which was 4 weeks ago, because we canceled the meeting in proximity to Thanksgiving, was we wanted to push on having all of the charters reviewed and pushed forward so we could talk about that at the Contributor Summit. Most of the action items related to actually pinging about that. There was also an action item about the CLA, but DIMS is not here at the moment, so we won't talk about that. I also had an action item to review the infra working group charter to see if I could make it less SIG-like, and I did not get that done in time for this meeting. I would really like to get that charter merged before the Contributor Summit. Where we had left it as of the last meeting was that we felt like it was too SIG-like specifically around the expression of who created and owned subprojects, and we were going to reword it so that we'd say the working group would find the right SIG to own a subproject, but the working group would be working on policies that made sense for how to run things appropriately. I'd like 1 or 2 proxy people that I could ping to get a sign off once I have done that rewording, rather than having to go through a majority vote from the steering committee, if you are all in favor of that.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I'm good.
Brandon, I think your name had been put forward last time, just because you're coming from the product security team. I would appreciate you taking a look at it. Do you have the time for that?
I will, but I won't until December 26th. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe Brian, since you were the person who was expressing concern, can I ping you?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, thanks. I know we're all super busy. I will try to keep it short. Okay, I'm gonna pop open a window and we can run through our project board, because I know I tried to go through and take a look at all of the SIG charters. And then if there's anything else we wanted to talk about that's not on the board, please add it to the agenda at the bottom there. So let me figure out how to do the screen sharing thing. Cool. I'm not sure that's working. Try this again. I swear I do know how to use a computer. Okay, there we go. All right, so you should see our board. The way we've walked this through in the past is to go from blocked backwards. Documentation and sunset procedures for SIGs and working groups is blocked on me, as I recall. I think basically this is done. I just needed to sanity check that we have deduped the governance files, but I'm happy to close this out and carry forward with that off of this board and out of this meeting's purview. Ensuring all repos have the same contributing structure. I think where we were at last time was that somebody under Phil, I don't know, Jeff Regan had some concerns that we were forcing too many files into the root of a repo, and Phil was going to go talk to Jeff to just kind of deal with it for now. Phil, can I get you to follow up on that and then ping Nikita? Because she's been the person who's been pushing forward a lot of the contributing.md and security contacts files.
Really, so the action here is to just say, don't worry about that on the issue, and then have Nikita.
Yes. I can also connect you with Nikita, and maybe she can help carry that forward.
Okay.
But yeah. Okay. In progress, let's take a look at where we are at with the charters. We are a lot further along than I thought we would be by this point, honestly. So thanks to everybody who's pushed on that. Michelle, you said you were going to take a look at SIG autoscaling afterwards. Appreciate that. API machinery is also under review at the moment, I think. Brian, I know you've expressed a number of comments that haven't gotten resolved. How do you feel about whether or not we're going to get to this before the contributor summit?
I will ping Marlon about it.
Okay. All right. And then, yeah, I think this one, okay, cool. So I'm happy with it if Michelle is happy with it. And if Brendan, are you on the call, Brendan? Sorry, I'm not noticing here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, if you and Michelle can sanity check that, that would be super helpful.
Sure, yeah, I added a bunch of comments, and it's on my to-do list to go back and check. I read through what they said. I wanted to go through one more time, but
okay, cool.
Seemed mostly done.
I pinged the contributor experience folks at the meeting this morning. I'm just kind of waiting for them to address some feedback. I dropped down, get consensus. At that point, I need to hand it off to one more steering committee reviewer to do so. Sarah was the person who was listed for this, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to reach her. Is there anybody who would like to volunteer to be a reviewer in her stead for contributor experience?
I can do that.
Okay, Phil. Thank you, Phil. So that leaves us with SIG PM, who I have not really, I have reached out to them. They kind of have this in their README, but it's not quite the same thing as a charter. I've reached out to Stephen Augustus a number of times, but it just doesn't look like it's going to get done before the summit. I can try to ping that one more time and see what happens there. We have.
I can help push that one as well.
Okay.
Stephen.
That would be greatly appreciated. We have this wonderful thing where, Brian, I feel like you've been talking long enough about how you think SIG big data shouldn't actually be a SIG, and then somebody up and wrote a charter for it. I feel like we have written down some comments as to why we feel this doesn't necessarily qualify for SIG, but I'm not entirely sure how you think we should proceed with this.
Tim and I discussed it in Slack, and I think we're okay with status quo of it being a SIG right now, and we can sort it out next year.
There's other BOF things going on right now, so we don't want to rock the boat, so to speak, because they already have meetings set up. And
yeah, and if we change the status just before KubeCon, it would be kind of confusing for people.
Okay, I suppose that is fair. I think this is just going to reinforce that just because we have charters doesn't necessarily mean that these SIGs are going to be set in stone and live forever. And to maybe emphasize that one of the first things we as the steering committee are going to be looking at this coming week is how best to sort of reconcile and what's the word Tim always uses, rationalize all of the SIGs.
yeah, I think we should probably mention that as part of the contributor summit.
That's what I meant. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so we can merge the charter or not merge the charter, but I think changing it now would be confusing. So we should just leave it as status quo, at least until KubeCon.
I just leave it held and we can deal with it later.
Okay. I am fine with that. The remaining charters.
Is somebody going to update that on SIG big data, whoever's the reviewer? Because right now it just looks kind of awkward.
I can do it, or if Tim wants to do it, he can do it.
Yeah, I've already chatted with him privately too, so I can mention it there.
Okay.
Correct.
I am looking for SIG docs charter because I swear they had one up. Yep, right there. So the SIG docs charter, Joe and Brian are on the hook to be reviewers for this. It seems pretty light. I can help review. This seems like Zachary is generally pretty responsive. Seems relatively non-controversial. And then that leaves us with all of the charters that pertain to clouds. So SIG Azure snuck in before we had a template, and then SIG GCP and OpenStack have held off because we're thinking those SIGs would like to sort of fold in the cloud provider. And I think even I've had Stephen comment somewhere, maybe it's on whatever this links to, nope, that he would like to focus on moving, I think you commented at the bottom of this issue actually, that he'd like to spend more time rolling the SIG into SIG cloud provider. And that's something that requires more discussion, I think, on our part, and is best done face-to-face with all of those involved at the Contributor Summit. So I'm comfortable, you know, at least we're most of the way there. We can stand up and say we have most every SIG has a charter except for the cloud SIGs because we're figuring out how to sort that out. Any questions, comments, or concerns before we move on from charters?
If you'd like me to take a look at the SIG docs charter, let me know. I can. I had pinged them by email a while ago, and I guess he forgot or didn't realize that GitHub notifications are hard for me to notice. So,
all right. I feel like it could be fleshed out. I'll take a pass at it, and if it looks like it's pretty much good to go, I will ping you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, next up, CNCF developers rep from the Kubernetes Steering Committee. Michelle, I think you said you were fine to continue doing this, and I don't think there are really any objections from this group. You've been doing an awesome job.
Yeah, I think we could do a better job of maybe answering when folks ask if there are any concerns we want brought up with the GV. We should probably put a little bit more thought into that in the future. Maybe we can schedule, if we know in advance when the meetings are going to be, maybe we can discuss it at one of these meetings.
That sounds good.
Michelle, how far is Michelle on?
Yes.
I am.
Yeah. How far in advance do you know about the meeting times, dates?
We usually know several months in advance, but Brandon and I always send out an email. Happy to bring it up on the call. I think I've brought it up before that, hey, a governing board meeting has come up or is coming up, but we can do that more and more in advance.
You have, and we've been our usual responsive selves. I think what might help is if there's any sort of agenda that's coming up in advance that you could drag us through on this call, that could be helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I believe the TOC will send out slides and stuff in advance. I don't know if the governing board does anything similar.
Yeah, the governing board.
Usually it's only usually a few days in advance. So.
Okay, that's fine. Maybe that, or like just a brief recap of the governing board thing for us. I don't know, but I think you've been doing an awesome job. If you want to continue doing that, great. That sounds wonderful.
Okay, sounds good. And Brian, I'll give it some thought and see how we can do better.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
I just feel like we should take advantage of it since we do have that position.
I agree. Okay, where does the effort to move Kate's infra to CNCF fall? It falls under a working group, a charter that I will work on, document what working groups are and how to form disband. This is the reason this is still open, going down to the bottom, is because we want to add a field to SIGs so we can formally specify for a given working group what SIGs does it cut across and interact with. And the other one is we need to actually link the repositories document. I reopened this one, Brandon, just because the link itself is just text right now instead of a link. So we just need to close that loop. Then once we decide we know what working groups are and we have that fully defined, we need to go through and actually audit the existing working groups. I think, again, this is something that we can talk about at the Contributor Summit as part of our update, as part of the rationalization process, and the version I gave at this morning's Meet Our Contributor edition was that we think working groups should be temporary and ephemeral. They should disband once their documented stated goals have been accomplished. And there are a number of working groups today that seem to exist in perpetuity. So it's probably time for us to revisit whether those make sense as working groups, or if they need to be turned into sub-projects, or if the goal has been accomplished and they should move elsewhere. Do we feel that's the best way to deal with this, or is there anything more we should do?
Sounds like a good plan.
Seems reasonable.
Okay. Cool. I just want to make sure this isn't me monologuing. Kubernetes license scanning. I unfortunately have zero idea where we are on this. Dims would probably be the person most qualified to discuss this. Does anybody know anything more? This again came up in this morning's Meet Our Contributors call in the context of Brandon mentioning the Node.js dependency vulnerability that happened, where there was some malicious backdoor patch that was committed to one library, which was then pulled in as a transitive dependency to another Bitcoin library, and it allowed them to steal keys or coins out of various people's wallets, which just reinforces the notion that we as a project are where the buck stops when it comes to fully vetting and auditing our third-party dependencies. So while we're doing this from a licensing perspective first, that's great, but we need to make sure we kind of have some sort of ongoing process and or team that we feel is capable of vetting dependency changes as they come in. We do already have some sort of documentation checklist for why you might need to rationalize bringing in a dependency. It's in a doc that's named godep.md in community. We could probably find a better place to surface that information, but I do think we probably have some more policy stuff to do. But as far as licensing goes, I remember Heketi was definitely a thorn in our side, but I don't think it was the only one, and I'm not sure how much more we have to go here.
Yeah, there's an issue open with a list of dependencies, and some of them in other repos also keep getting reintroduced. This came up when Cryo was being proposed to transfer to CNCF. It had one of the dependencies that we removed, I think, twice from the Kubernetes repo. Looking back through my email, I don't see anything more recent than August on that. But the other issue that came up with respect to the Node.js thing was the security audit by a third party, which I suppose is a separate but another issue that we should make sure moves forward. Checking the list in the steering issue. Heketi rate limit, YAML v2, HCL, Golang, LRU, DHCP for client, and FluxDB client.
I guess I'm kind of feeling like someone should take an action item to have this list refreshed so that we can talk more substantively about this at our face-to-face. Because it sounds like we need to figure out what the policy is, and then what automation we are lacking to help us maintain a good known state. Sounds like we're still in the process of getting to that known good state first.
Yeah,
I guess I feel
say
like that's totally true, but in the interim, I think we need to make sure that we feel like we have enough eyeballs on every time a dependency, at least in KK, changes, and perhaps we need to change the pull bot to represent that somehow or something, because I think this is all good stuff, but I worry it'll take us a year, and I suspect that this style of attack is going to get worse before it gets better.
So the number of people who can actually approve changes to vendor is relatively small. Let's go see what dep owners actually resolves to. But I know just anecdotally that Christoph Blecker is one of those people, and he's really on point as far as, are you sure you want to make this change? Yeah, it's Christoph, Tim Hawken, and Stephen, I always forget his name, but like these are three individuals I do trust to be really diligent and thorough at changes, not necessarily auditing what is there, but I do trust them to guard the sanctity of that.
I don't know. This is really hard for human beings to get right. It's just
Yeah.
period, full stop, end of story. Like no human being can transitively go through the thousands of lines of code that kind of gets impaled upon the repository every time you do this.
That I
That's-
agree
yeah.
with, but I'm just saying they are really good at being like, do you really need this? Like,
Yeah, but that's not going to help here, right? Like, it's not about need. It's about we need something that'll do CVE scanning or something.
We need
quicker
tooling.
than-
Okay. Hi.
Hi,
I can add some color. So the Hecate one we fixed already. The YAML v2 we fixed. I've been working through the list a little bit. In the main KK repository, whatever was there, we already fixed. Now, since 113 is out, we have to get the other repositories vendoring 113 and getting to the point where Hecate is not used, or the correct version of Hecate is used. And several of the others, like the rate limit one, we already have a replacement, which many people are using. So it's mostly trying to drive changes that already been done in KK repository in the other repositories. That's what we need to do now. So that is one part, as a part of the existing stuff that is broken that we need to fix. The other one is Stephen Augustus is at a point where we can switch on Fossa, the plugin, Fossa, whatever, GitHub scanner thingy, where it gives you a badge that we can put on multiple repositories. So that is in progress. I just asked Stephen a couple of days ago what state it was in. One more time. I think they're very close. So that was one. Then the other one was Nikita and I talked to the legal representative from CNCF, and he does his own scanning apparently. So he promised to scan all the repository one more time at the beginning of the year. So those are the things that we've been doing on this side, on this topic.
I guess I'm not that worried about the licenses. I mean, it's good to do it, but I'm not as worried. I'm just very concerned that this will be the flavor of the month attack for 2019, and I strongly suspect that we are vulnerable, and and it's only luck, effectively, that we don't get attacked.
Right. The one thing that is that is working for us is like we vendor the stuff, so there is more likelihood of us finding it rather than the NPM or even
I
the
totally
Java
disagree
version.
with that. I disagree with that entirely with exactly what Tim said and everything else. Like, I don't care how diligent people are, they're not looking at the code.
Not that
Right.
level of code. There's just far too much.
Well, if someone knows of a good service, we can ask CNCF to pay for it, and I'm sure that's not a problem.
Yeah, the thing is, it's not there right now. We don't there isn't one. And there was one exchange with Jess, and Jess was saying that GitHub is probably going to do something around this area too.
Clayton says, you don't want to donate it? How much does it cost, Clayton? I mean, you don't have to tell us, I guess, but can CNCF pay for it?
It's actually a good question. Let me go talk to some of the PST guys. I don't think it's exactly what we need, but it was funny because I was like, hey, we do something like that.
Yeah, let's.
I mean, and I know people like Black Duck try and do things like this too, but like what I really want is a hash map from Go package to CVE.
So that's actually what this is part of VS Code now. It's the dependency analytics service. That's a machine learning AI backed CVE to dependency translator. Let me go look and see where they're at for Go. We've been talking about using this internally for our stuff, so maybe it actually be useful.
If it's VS Code, do you mean is it a Microsoft service?
It's a plugin for it's one of those things that we've been working on in the VS Code ecosystem, which is just
okay. So, but it's a Red Hat. It's a Red Hat service that is a VS Code plugin.
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Let me follow up on that.
Yeah, because I mean that's at least a good place to start. It's not going to catch everything, obviously, but at least it's a good place to start.
Right, but then are they going to actually look through the code and find things like what Jordan fixed?
No, that's not what I'm worried about. I'm not worried about that. I mean, so Dims, did you look at the Node.js thing?
So the Node.js one was somebody started using one of the packages, and then somebody took over that GitHub repository or paid for it, and then they started adding code for mining.
Yeah, they landed like hashed up code to do mining. So that's what I'm more worried about. I'm not worried. Like, we'll find RBAC things, and I think our process there is fine.
Yeah, automated tools are not going to find bugs, subtle bugs.
Right, exactly. So and that's better too, I guess, because humans won't find the subtle bugs either, except for accidentally or whatever. But it's the like injection attack where somebody says, "Hey," like I guess my thought exercise to you is like, if you thought about a way if you wanted to attack a cloud, a public cloud, say today, I would absolutely go in through an open source project.
Mm-hmm.
And I would do exactly something like this. And Kubernetes is a good target because of the Go dependency, because of the way Go dependencies work.
Okay, so for this, one of the things that I've been looking at is what is a list of personal repositories that we use in our dependency chain, right? Because not all of the stuff that we use comes from other org repositories. A lot of personal repositories are being used in our dependency chain. That would be like, the first leaf that we need to go.
Yeah, and maybe that's the right answer too, is just to kind of cut through it and say like, well, these are the ones we think are more vulnerable, and we are going to force you to do manual scanning, or, of these ones that are more vulnerable.
It seems to me like this is possibly like, it's a build, test, and release process, right?
Yes.
That should be a group of folks who are empowered to make sure that this happens. And whether or not we even hire them from the CNCF or whatnot is debatable if we don't have enough resources to do it. But I do consider this to be like a super high priority item.
Yeah, I mean, do we want to just kind of put out a call? I mean, it strikes me as something we could get interest of some skilled person to do.
So I think we should slow this down and hash this out face to face. I thought Brandon had a comment though before I keep going on.
Well, I mean, I think the critical piece is no one has a database of Go package to CVEs. Like, I very rarely even see CVEs for Go software. So that's like kind of the linchpin. We can't activate until either a vendor or somebody commits to building that database. And Red Hat might have a view on it, but it's not probably going to be the same view we need, really based on RPM.
Yeah, it's not going to be the same view that you'd have for like core things, because the volume on Go code is just not high enough from a reporting. It's like the same problem Node and Maven have.
Oh, yeah, just searching just now, and most of them seem to be JavaScript, Ruby, and Python.
The maximum is Golang itself. There are a bunch of CVEs on Golang, but not
right. But
Golang.
But what I'm trying to say is, like, in these other ecosystems, in PM, and there's ways of adding that metadata to your package that are normalized and that people can build the database against. That's not the case. There's no way for someone to express there's a CVE in my package today.
Yeah. I guess my concern here, and I'm sorry, we can have this discussion in person too, but I'm sorry to harp on it, but like, I really, really worry that we will say, oh, there's not a database, oh, it's too hard, oh, we can't do it, and then when it happens, we'll be like, shit, why didn't we do it? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like we have a responsibility here to actually try and do something, even if...
I admire your enthusiasm, Brendan, and I want you to channel it into a proposal that is relatively pre-baked that we can actually review face-to-face, because I think that we need to, as a group, rationalize how should we solve this problem up front? So like what DIMS has been doing from a licensing perspective, how do we kind of get to a known good place?
Okay.
And
I'm happy to do that. I guess then the meta question I have is, do we as a group collectively believe that this is high enough priority that we should do that? Because I do, but I want to make sure that if I'm going to, champion this, it's going to be something people will get behind.
I mean, I think one of the things we want to come out of this meeting with is at least a high-level idea of what we want to come out of our face-to-face with. And I think one of those would be an agreed-upon proposal for how we're going to deal with this solution. So if you bring a fully formed proposal, that'll probably be a more productive session for us than us all trying to hash it out there and then.
Right on, will do.
Right. My only point here was trying to make sure that everybody knows what we are doing already. So then we can build on top of that.
So maybe Dims, you and Brendan can collaborate because you have put in a fair amount of work in this space, so you can provide the boots on ground perspective.
Yeah, sounds good, Brendan. Sounds good, Aaron.
Okay, thanks. Because I do believe it's important, but I think we should, defining the proposal should at least include who's going to own this within the project. Would it be the product security team? Would it be a SIG? Would it be a working group? Would it be the steering committee and we just contract it out to a third party? And then how would the solution actually work? Would it be build or buy? Do we need lawyer cats? Whatever.
It's a lot of bureaucracy.
It seems like this could just be a sub project and SIG contributor experience, maybe. Or
I think a release. I mean, honestly, I would say release. But anyway,
release is fine.
I will come with a proposal.
Okay. Okay, that's everything in the in progress column. I preemptively put at least one thing I wanted us to chat, but I wanted to time box it super short. So if this leads us to a huge discussion of charter scope, I'm just going to punt it to face-to-face. But SIG release noticed yesterday that there are 2 bullet points in our charter. One says decide how and when official releases of Kubernetes artifacts are made and what they include. And another bullet point says declare a release so that the committee can ensure quality/feature/other requirements, quality/feature/other requirements are met. I do not think we have been doing either of these things. Further, I think it would be a horrible idea to put the steering committee in the critical path of the execution of these things. However, maybe it makes sense for us to be in the critical path of refining the policies around these things. Brian, you have your hand up.
Yeah, as I recall, the way we wrote the steering committee charter is that the steering committee holds all the power, even for things we plan to delegate, which was pretty much everything in the list except for the meta.
And so that brings me to the meta point, which is I think there are a lot of points in the charter that we have delegated the execution of these 2 other groups, presumably because we're just the escalation point of last resort. We don't actually do the execution, but it seems like we're kind of the escalation point of last resort for everything on the project. So I'm not sure why it makes sense for us to explicitly list these things out.
Made more sense when there was no steering committee. Right? When nobody had clear authority.
So I think the reason I'm raising just this tiny point up, I don't want to cover all the other things that are supposedly covered, is as we start to look to redefine what it means to release Kubernetes, looking at repositories looking at functionality moving out of tree, who do we need involved in that discussion? My canned response, my hope, is that SIG release and SIG architecture could hash this out amongst themselves, and that's where the key decisions would lie. I would hope that the steering committee does not need to have some sort of majority vote on such a proposal unless those 2 SIGs find that they cannot come to agreement. Is that a fair statement to make? I'm not hearing.
I think so. I was sorry, I was just looking at the original charter before the edits because I thought in the original charter we had said something about intending to delegate. But I don't see where the obvious place where that is. But yeah, I mean, in general, this steering committee, we don't intend to get involved in technical decisions, even escalations. It's more about solving the meta problems of structuring the project and setting up the governance and deciding who's the decider on technical issues. So, somewhere between SIG architecture and SIG release, we should be able to, and the other stakeholding SIGs with respect to testing and docs and whatnot, I think we should be able to collaborate and come up with, if there's a policy change.
Okay. I think that broader theme is something we want to keep in mind face to face. We probably want to review our backlog and review our charter and see which priorities and things make sense to live on or not. So I'm not going to look to clarify the language for this at this point, but this gives me enough to move forward for those parties who are interested in changing what release as a word means to some people.
Yeah, just as one example, KubeUp, I think, is still in the release from the cluster directory and has been deprecated for 2 years. At some point, we're going to have to replace that in the end-to-end tests and remove it from the release bundle. So I think these things will evolve, and the relevant SIGs should be involved in making those incremental changes.
Well, at this point, SIG Cluster Lifecycle has all but washed our hands of KubeUp, and only Google owns it at this point.
Yeah, and that's a very tenuous hold at best. No, I could not agree more for sure. But for me, it's just maybe making sure that we find a way to reword some of our charter to make it clear that we're there for escalation point of last resort, and there are some policy related things that must absolutely go through this committee for up-down voting, but that there's probably, if it's not explicitly listed as such, it's probably something that we have delegated to another SIG. And we can state that with a little more confidence because we kind of have all of the charters in front of us and we can rationalize what goes where now. Those were all of the specific things I had to talk about that were on the board. Does anybody have anything else, or should I move us to open discussion? We have 15 minutes left.
And the main thing I wanted to bring up is the contributor summit. At the end of the day, there's Q&A with the steering committee.
Okay.
I think everybody saw the email thread, but just want to make sure people are aware of that so they can be there. And George had a good list of, I think, 3 things that they asked us to talk about in addition as a warm-up. Well, 4 things. Okay, introducing ourselves, summary of what we accomplished, and we could probably talk about that off the top of our heads, but it might be worthwhile to just think about what we plan to do for the coming year. That seems like a good topic that people reasonably would be interested in. We can start an email thread on that, or we can discuss it now. I guess we have a few minutes left. Obviously, the security thing is top of mind. But, since a lot of the governance bits are not completely done, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, probably there will be other issues to move on to.
I think one of the canned answers I gave this morning during Meet Our Contributors was that we want to kind of reframe what we do towards the model that has worked well for us this past year is when somebody comes with a fully formed solution, or when we have delegated the execution of something to some entity that then owns it. And so to find a way to empower as many people as possible to move forward on these issues, rather than create an expectation, as perhaps we had over the past year, that the steering committee would take care of it. We're here to steer. We're not actually here to do the work because our plates are already super duper extremely full.
That's a great point. One possibility is we could take advantage of the role board. We could start defining more roles, like we need someone to lead the security scanning efforts as just one example, and you can start populating the role board and vetting candidates for those roles.
So the themes that sort of came to my mind were this whole rationalization of trying to kind of make the scope and size and organization of the project a little more sane. This flat space of 30 plus SIGs and 7 to 10 or however many working groups is really just oppressive to a newcomer, let alone somebody who's trying to figure out which place they need to go to find a decision maker. So scoping that down and adding some kind of taxonomy or hierarchy seems like it might make a lot of sense. I also think that as this project grows and matures, we're really focused on what it takes to keep Kubernetes boring. We are interested in it being less of a bumpy ride for the project. I don't think the steering committee is involved in this, but I would impart as our vision a desire for the project to focus on its health. So that means deflaking tests, having a more sane and reliable release process, better understanding why we have all of these tests, starting to put formal gates in place, a formalized list of requirements for what it means for a stable to go from alpha to beta, from alpha to beta to stable, and to continue to identify those places where there are still gaps now that we have all of the SIG charters. If you dropped me in front of the audience, that's what I would have said. So I think like having either a private mailing list or a Google Doc to riff on that would be good. And then again, I think saving some time at the end for us each to individually give some shout outs, just so that we can give some recognition without necessarily singling people out as the project, but just as people.
Sounds good.
Did anybody else have anything they felt particularly strong about letting the community know? That we really want KubeCon to stop being so massively long, and could we please just do our work on a more sane schedule instead of this ridiculous march?
So if people aren't aware, there is discussion in various places about smaller conferences. So Prometheus started with smaller contributor conferences, PromCon, well, not just contributors, but smaller conferences. Envoy had EnvoyCon. There seems to be traction on that finally after 2 years in CNCF. So folks are looking at that. You know, obviously we have had some smaller events like the contributor summits, the leadership summit, and the project is sort of huge. So getting it as small as some of the smaller projects would be hard, but I think that's definitely worth looking at. So one theme is more local events for people who can't travel to the ginormous conferences, which have fewer venues. So they would be smaller just because they would be at smaller venues and they'd be advertised as being more local. But that's something that we could get involved with at the conference. There's going to be a session about how to make the conference better. It is on Thursday afternoon. So take a look at that and come to that if you have ideas about what you would want to see, whether it's smaller events or changes to the main event, or what have you.
Yeah, there is, for example, there's going to be a Kubernetes day in Bangalore, which is like a 1 day long event, just local people in March.
Yeah, there was a Cloud Native Day, I think in Toronto, maybe it was last year, that was co-located with another event that had really poor turnout. But I think the Kubernetes days that are more local, now there's enough interest in Kubernetes that seems like it might do pretty well, like meetups on steroids in some sense. So we'll see how it goes. I think there's some other locations that have been discussed. I don't remember what they are. That I don't know if that topic is coming up at the session on Thursday, but someone could bring it up if they were interested in that.
So you just reminded me of something real quick. I personally have been a huge fan of the Contributor Summit. I know in order to keep it as small and focused as we have, it's had to be sort of an invite-only thing, or as close to invite-only as possible. One of the ways we qualified people to get into it this year was by using dev stats numbers. Weirdly, coincidentally, ever since we noticed that we mentioned we were using dev stats numbers for voter eligibility, I've noticed a large increase in the number of people who are submitting random typo PRs, to the point where it seems like more people are noticing it. It's unclear to me whether or not it's increasing a burden, but I'm hearing more and more about it. So I think that's one of the most valuable conferences. I think we should probably move it to invite only. And one of the things that I have always complained about with the Contributor Summit has finally been fixed this year. So I just wanted to thank Paris for putting effort into making sure that all of the sessions will be recorded at the Contributor Summit this year. So I often feel like that's some of the most valuable content. So I'm really thankful we'll at least be able to link to that, even though not everybody will be able to participate day of. And that's a trend I think could help with having more of these smaller focused conferences going forward. But I do think that just relying on raw numbers that can be easily gained, like I don't want to get into the discussion about measuring the value of contribution. I just think that we should move to some sort of invite-only model for that, with some room for newcomers. As hostile as that seems to newcomers, I can't think of other better ways to keep that kind of conference focused.
Yeah, when it was order 100 people, it was totally invite only. You know, it was basically project leaders, SIG leads, and people they recommended. I think this year it was expanded to maybe 4 times that size.
It was 400 and it was put on the main funnel for the conference, which I think was a mistake because there were a number of people who were just like, yeah, sure, I'll click every checkbox as I register for KubeCon. I'll totally do this thing as well. And there was a lot of time spent being like, have you actually contributed to Kubernetes? If not, we're going to move you to the new contributor workshop. If you have, please fill out this Google form so we can actually vet that you have contributed to Kubernetes. I don't think it should have been on the main page at all. It was just way too much traffic to funnel through.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I agree with that, although I would be careful. I think one of the challenges that we face here is that there's too much of a sort of, who network in the project already. And so I would be skeptical of notions of going back to pure invitation only, at least not without some way of making sure that people are looking more.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good point. One thing I found last year is just being really clear about what the point of it is can help. Like I know at some of the SIG deep dives and intros, people showed up who had no interest in directly participating in the SIGs because it wasn't super clear what they were about. So we could just make it easier for people to self-select by being a lot more upfront. Like we want people who are really gonna be serious contributors and send a bunch of PRs to come to this.
Yeah, I agree. I was just throwing the straw man out there to have some of us maybe think about it. I'm not asking you to act on it because I do think I don't want to be hostile to new contributors at all, but it's
also,
tough.
I think there's been a lot of fear about gamification from the beginning, and I've actually seen no evidence that it actually works. It's certainly happening, but there's no evidence to me that it actually works.
So anecdotally, what I've heard is companies in China, for example, in that area, they are asking their committers to do these kinds of things. This is not just in Kubernetes; it's happening in OpenStack for a while as well.
I have been told that by at least one person who worked for one of these companies.
No, I totally agree with that. The question is whether it's actually manipulating the results. That's my question.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that it's happening. I just wonder I'm not sure that it's actually changing who you'd invite anyway.
Yeah, especially for the top contributors, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, if you're pulling the top 100, I just don't think typos are getting you there.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, that leaves us with 3 minutes. Is there anything else we wanted to talk about? I did notice Woo, the diversity lunch sold out. Paris brought that up, their contributor experience this morning. There are going to be 70 people there, which is great.
I did add some items to the end of the agenda if nobody else has anything.
Go for it.
Okay. We're planning on meeting Thursday evening and Friday, so I don't know if any prep has been done for that. in terms of an agenda. So I just added a GitHub issue to start on that. Maybe we could just all add things that we want to talk about. So we know where we're getting into. And then also the Code of Conduct Committee has put together a charter, and there is something in your mailing list, or is something in the mailing list right now, the steering private mailing list around that. So there's a link to a Google Doc that contains their proposed charter. And so it's pretty important for us, I think, as a steering committee to review that. Since they especially talk about how they ratified their own charter and it has to do with the steering committee. So if you could take it some time and review that, that'd be great. I think we should aim for a simple majority LGTM for that, unless anybody has any objections.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. That's all I had.
Yay, KubeCon.
Yeah.
We do this like once every 2 years.
I would be in favor of that. That sounds great. I did have somebody ask this morning, like, why is it so quiet? It's like, isn't KubeCon next week? Like, shouldn't there be a lot of activity right now?
I definitely had a senior moment earlier today where I was like, yeah, the last time KubeCon, that was only a year ago. Oh my God, I'm old.
Okay, thanks everybody. See you at KubeCon.
Bye.
Bye.